looking to buy a house, but they're in a lease until next fall. So
Okay.
should I just stay in touch with them until their lease is up, or is there some verbiage I should use to let them know that they should see if there's a penalty? If there's not, we can get them into a house sooner. What would you do in that
So I
situation?
would absolutely find out what have them find out what the ramifications are if they break their lease early. Because in some cases, it's like, oh, well, if we don't get the apartment rented, you've got to pay for it until it's rented. And most apartments right now have like waiting lists and stuff. Like they've got people waiting to move in, so it might not be a big deal. Same thing with a
Okay.
house. Like it may not end up being that big of a deal, and getting them into someplace now versus waiting till the fall could be a huge savings on their part as far as their cost of the house continuing to go up or interest rates continuing to go up.
Yeah.
Now more than ever, like for the past couple of years, we're always like, yeah, push them to buy now, but rates are low. We're not expecting them to go up. Like prices will still go up, but now more than ever, we're anticipating there's still a shortage of, there was a drop in the number of listings sold or listings signed this last February in the MLS versus last year, which means that we are having actually this year, they've said it last year, but it wasn't actually the case. We're actually having an inventory shortage at this point. Last year, they're just going as fast as you can get them on the market. This year, we're actually having an inventory shortage, which is creating them to go fast. And the interest rates are starting to go up, and a 0.5% in interest rate is like $100 in payment.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I would see what it would take what happens if they break their lease.
Okay.
And maybe
right.
just kind of keep them, kind of moving in the forward direction.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks.
Oh, and that note, I have a question, Amy.
Yes.
Let's see, like, if you put your buyer on a contract already, and then if they see another, house, like a better house, oh, I don't want this one, I want this one. And then how do you deal with that?
That is such a hard topic to take on, because here's the deal. Number one, if they don't have an inspection or investigation contingency, pending their loan being denied or the appraisal not coming in, like they're locked into that property. They can cancel on the first one, but they're going to lose their deposit in that case, right?
Yeah.
Assuming they still have their investigation or inspection contingency in place, they could feasibly cancel that contract, walk away with their deposit. If they've had any inspections done, they're going to lose that money. Or if the appraisal's been done, they're going to lose that money. They're not going to recoup that. And I wouldn't cancel on the current contract until you actually get accepted on the other. Your best bet is once they enter into contract on a property, turn off their auto search. So they're at least you're not aiding the problem any longer.
Yeah.
Right? Because the grass always looks greener on the other side.
Right.
So that's one thing I would recommend you guys add to your checklist of things that you do once we're in contract, like turn off that auto search.
That's
Okay. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, you would just advise on that yeah, absolutely. Like we have the investigation contingency in place. If we were to put in an offer on another property and it were to get accepted, you absolutely could cancel on this property based on that inspection or investigation contingency period.
Within 3 days. Well, within 3 days, right? That it's not. Well, let me not add to.
All right, I'll come back. I'll address that here in a minute. If their inspection contingency, investigation contingency has been removed, as a lot of times we're doing with offers right now to get them accepted, they can still cancel, but they're going to lose their deposit and any money they're out in inspections and appraisals. I always like to be upfront with buyers and be honest and let them know that, yeah, I'm not going to like shuffle around it and be like, well, no, you can't really do that because that's kind of a pain and inconvenience or whatever. Like, here's the reality is, yes, you can cancel, and here's the ramifications of that. And I don't recommend we cancel on this one. We need to keep moving forward while we submit an offer on the other property that you think you like more. And then, let's stay focused and move forward with the process.
So
right?
scare them with that.
Yeah.
First
Right.
deposit.
Right.
Okay, yeah, you can do it, but here's, like you said, here's all the consequences to
Yeah.
that, you know?
So to Nate's comment on, well, don't you have 3 days? Okay, so if you have no contingency, right? You have no inspection contingency, you get into contract on a property, you're like, yes, we won, we got it. And then your buyer's like, hey, that's really cool, but this other property just came on the market. I'd much rather have that one and offers. When are they due? And you're like, well, they're due today. And you're like, great, let's submit. And you're like, but you can't cancel on this one because you have no contingency. Well, technically, if you haven't submitted the deposit and you've signed the liquidated damages clause, the deal with the liquidated damages clause is that the seller is limited to 3% or the deposit actually deposited. So if there's no deposit deposited, there's nothing for them to go after. So if they haven't made their good faith deposit yet,
Yeah.
then you could feasibly still cancel on that
Gotcha,
property, even with
but
no
only within
contingencies,
72 hours of that contract being accepted.
up until you deposit those funds in escrow.
And that's 72 hours as well, so
It's-
it's the same thing.
It's 3 days. Yeah, it's usually the default for your deposit is 3 days. So it's not necessarily like 3 days of accepted offer. It's just that the good faith funds are due within 3 days of accepted contract. And that doesn't count weekends or holidays on, that's the only time frame on the contract that doesn't count weekends and holidays. It's business days. And if they don't put a deposit in escrow, then they can, even with no contingencies in the offer, you could cancel.
Can I ask a question?
That
Thank
earnest
you.
deposit, earnest deposit is almost like, kind of almost, that's when you kind of locked in.
It's
You're
a,
really locked
yeah,
in.
it's a contingency of the contract for sure. Yeah. Who had a question?
Tara.
Yes.
Me. So on the seller side, can
Yeah.
they back out of a ratified contract at any time, or like under what conditions could a seller say like, you know what, I don't want to sell anymore, or something like that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, no, a seller can't back out unless there's a breach of the contract by the buyer. So only after giving a notice to perform to the buyer and the buyer not performing. Let's say the buyer was dragging their feet on getting the deposit into escrow. 2 days before that deposit's due, they could give a 48-hour notice to perform for that deposit. And then if they failed to get the deposit to escrow, sellers could cancel, or if they're supposed to remove a contingency, or if they were supposed to return signed documents, or give copies of the inspection reports. So there's lots of little timeframes and deadlines in there that the buyer has to adhere to. And if the buyer misses any one of those, even by like a little bit, if the seller's really trying to back out, you would serve that notice to perform 2 days before any of those deadlines are due, and you would keep each one, like throw it out there until the buyers failed to hit one, and then you could cancel.
So
Can I
that,
Can I ask a more specific question then?
Yes.
So, so in this specific escrow, the sellers are saying that so their appraisal fell short. The
Okay.
sellers are saying that they have 2 backup offers. And so they're asking if the buyers can come up a little bit on cash over appraisal.
Okay.
However, when we submitted the offer, we stated that they're going to stick to the appraised value. So, I mean, could they, like, if we continue to push that and say, you know, no, like, we agreed that we were going to stick to their appraised value when we submitted the offer, I mean,
What
could
would
sellers
put in
back-
writing with regards to that?
say that one more time, sorry?
What was put in writing in the offer with regards to the appraisal?
Just the contract. I didn't specify like if they were gonna put cash over appraisal or no cash over appraisal.
All right, so then, yeah, so the contract price is, let's say 550,000, appraisal comes in at 530,000. The
Mhm.
seller has no, even though verbally you guys said that, no, they're not gonna come over appraised value. There's nothing in the contract that states that the seller's gonna agree to that. And so
Okay.
the seller has a right to cancel if the buyer doesn't want to still purchase the property at the original contract price. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see. So if appraisal falls short, then they can back out because of those contingencies as well on the seller side.
If the appraisal falls short and the buyer doesn't want to move forward at the original contract price, then
Okay,
the seller would have the right to cancel.
okay, understood. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm sure the buyer would have to
you would
come up
have
with the
to-
difference.
Would you have to?
Wait, I missed that one. Can we put it?
Yeah, hold on
Oh.
just a second. Go ahead,
Would
Heather.
you have to go back and like put that in the contract, actually saying like, if the appraisal comes in at 5:30, I mean, that would be kind of silly, but would you have to physically write that in there saying like, we're not going over the appraisal at if it comes in at 500, we're not paying over 500 no matter what the contract says?
Yeah, so if you wanted the seller to agree to whatever the appraised value was, if you were afraid it was gonna come in low,
Yeah, that's what
then you'd want to put the similar verbiage that you would for like an appraisal gap clause, but no gap, right? If the appraisal comes in below contract price, buyer and seller agree that sales price will be the appraised value.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you would want to put that
You
in
have to
there,
put
which
that in there.
you're probably not gonna get your
Not
offer
gonna get
accepted.
offers.
But
Yeah.
it is what it is.
Because that's already like, yeah, look, the seller's already looking at that like, oh, yeah, they don't want to budge
Yeah.
for no adjustment.
Now, it'd be one thing if the property had been sitting on the market for some time, right? It wasn't like the first week on the market, it'd been sitting there and it was priced a little too high, then you may want to put a clause in there like, hey, we'll give you asking, but if the appraisal comes in low, we're all agreeing that we're gonna go with the appraised value,
Mhm.
right? Sam, what was your question?
I was kind of referring back to maybe the situation that we're in where the appraisal came back low. We do have the gap, but it's still lower than what we offered.
Yeah, so normally speaking, with the appraisal gap, which is why I usually instruct you guys, and I've talked about it before about putting into the contract, you know, if appraisal comes in below contract price, buyer and seller agree that sales price will be up to 10,000 over appraised value, not to exceed contract price, right? Because now in the verbiage of the contract, we have the buyer and seller agreeing that whatever that appraised value is, we're moving forward with whatever that gap was up to that contract price, right? So if we're in contract at 550, it appraises at 530, we had a $10,000 gap. We're now moving forward at 740. There's no question about it. Okay.
Yeah, I like, that's simple. I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Sam's case, the seller came back and countered, and part of the counter offer was that if the appraisal came in below 10,000, more than 10,000 below contract price, that the seller wasn't obligated to sell.
Oh, wow.
Right, and that wasn't the exact verbiage, but it was something like that in the counter offer, which left it
Wow.
open that if it came in lower than that, which I'm kind of surprised at how low this one came in, but maybe I had to do with the pest work. But
Yes.
that doesn't, nobody's obligated at that point. Well, the buyer can renegotiate. The seller can come back and be like, no, we want you to come in with 15,000 over appraised value, like meet us in the middle, or they can put the property back on the market, right? So nobody was obligated to move forward in that case. But yeah, normally what happens when appraisal comes, if you have no appraisal gap in that contract and the appraisal comes in low, the buyer now has the ability, based on the appraisal contingency, to either move forward at the contract price with the appraisal being in low, and they would have to cover the gap in cash between that appraised value and the contract price, because your lender's only going to lend based on the lower of the two values. Okay. And then, or the buyer can try to renegotiate the contract price based on the appraised value, at which point the seller can either approve or deny it. You would do that on an AEA form, an amendment to the existing agreement. You would put new, based on appraised value contract price to be 530,000. The seller has the right to approve or reject it, and they can submit another one if they wanted to. If they're like, well, no, meet us in the middle, like 540, we're good, or 535, like whatever that is, they can do that. Or then the buyer can turn around and cancel the contract because they don't want to pay 20,000 over the appraised value. So the buyers can then issue a cancellation of contract based on the appraisal contingency and walk away.
Question, isn't the appraisal though then attached to the house? So they really won't get more than,
So the
like they're kind of
appraisal-
stuck at that price, right?
The appraisal only attaches to the home if it's an FHA or VA appraisal. If it's a conventional appraisal, it does not pull up in the new case file.
Okay, so they can go back and list it and
They
still
could.
get
Yeah.
over asking, but someone will have to pay
Yes.
more.
And you don't
Okay.
have to disclose in that instance what the appraised value was, because it's not a material defect. It's an opinion. So the low appraisal does not have to be disclosed if it's not FHA or VA.
Who would disclose? You mean the seller?
The seller.
Yeah, they don't have to know.
So what ramifications, because obviously if the buyer backs out, the ramification could be that deposit if it's not protected by contingency. If the seller decides I just don't want to sell anymore or whatever, and it's no breach of contract on the buyer side, what ramifications could happen on the seller side?
You can sue the seller for specific performance and force them to sell the property.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can issue it.
Wondering.
You would attach a judgment against the property. I can't think of what that's called. It's like a less pendants or something. It's one of those terms. Nate probably knows it. It's
Yeah.
one of those terms you learn when you're getting ready to take your test. So
Yeah.
you can record against the property, which prevents it from being sold. And then you would go after them in a lawsuit and sue for specific performance to force them to sell the property, because legally they have no ability to cancel that contract outside of any buyer breach or the seller having like a sale for the purchase of the contingency for the purchase of a replacement property or something to that effect.
Okay, good to know. Not that I would ever want to be in that situation, but just wondering.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Amy, how common is that?
The contract reports, I can just only imagine going back and negotiating.
I'm sorry, Milo, what'd you say?
How common is that?
It's not common. I've only threatened it once. Um,
And what happened with the threat? Did they end up selling?
Yeah.
They ended up or concur?
we reached a middle
Okay.
ground of which we shouldn't had to reach. However, my buyers were up against the time frame of having to get out of the house they were selling, and it was the holidays, and it was the beginning of the COVID shutdown, so the courts were shut down. So we were in for like a long haul process of my poor buyers having to move into a trailer for like a year if we were to move that way. So we ended up reaching an agreement, and they sold the property to them.
And Amy, what was the situation again? I'm as I'm listening to all of this, what is the situation where you would have to, where that would come about?
That would have been like if the sellers were trying to cancel the contract and they had no right to cancel the contract. The
I
buyer was
see.
in breach.
I
And in this
see.
one, we happen to have an appraisal gap in the contract, which is why I changed the verbiage to the buyer and seller agree that the sales price will be 10,000 over appraised value, not to exceed contract price, because I put the
Oh, you
word
put that
agrees in
in.
there.
You already put it in there that we're not gonna pay 10,000 over that appraised gap, and if your seller has to agree to that.
Yeah, that we're that's what the final contract price will be, but that wasn't in this contract. It was just, if the appraisal comes in below contract price, buyer's willing to pay 10,000 over appraised value or whatever it was. There was a number, I think it was 7,500 or something. Or maybe it was appraised value on this one. And the appraisal came in low, which we were anticipating because it was priced too high.
I don't know if I would.
Yeah.
And the sellers, we actually took it to card legal, and card legal said, you absolutely have grounds to push them on this issue and get them to sell it for contract price, because that was the agreed to price. And again,
I see.
we reached some middle ground because the circumstances didn't warrant us taking a long, lengthy legal process to get it remedied. Which is why then I changed the terminology at that point.
I
to-
see.
that the buyer and seller agree, so that it was very clear as day to both parties that they agreed to this.
Good. And that was in writing, and it's ideal to mitigate that without having to take it further.
In the beginning, how much was the sellers facing to lose? What was the difference in the amount of money that they were,
That
backing
is
off?
a really good question. I want to say that appraisal came in 25,000 or something below contract price.
So they would have lost $15,000 anyway.
Yeah.
So it's probably worth it for them.
Yeah, I mean, we could have pushed it, but again, my poor buyers, we still laugh about it to this day. That was a horrible transaction. And then the sellers refused to move out, and I had to pay for half their moving costs.
Oh my. Oh, I feel like, was that this past holiday, Amy?
It was 2 holidays
Yeah.
ago.
Oh, okay.
Had a
Okay.
house that they were moving to, or the sellers?
They did. They
did.
had a place to go.
So that
They
was
just
good.
were being,
Amy,
Yeah,
plug
that
in
was
your
good.
laptop.
I feel like that's another reason why it's so important to price a properties adequately and not overprice them, because it can put everybody in a bad situation.
yeah, and you've got lots of people coming in above appraised value right now and what even
Yeah,
trying to get the properties. And so even if you're pricing it right, you're still up against this head butting situation because you're trying to win the property for your clients,
Right.
and you're trying
Yeah.
to protect all your people. And sometimes like on the listing side now, I'll put in there, like if somebody puts in an appraisal gap guarantee, I'll come back around and counter them with if the property fails to appraise at whatever number. And usually I put it like list price, right? Then the seller's not obligated to sell. Because I want to protect my seller from a really silly appraiser coming through and lowballing us, because it happens.
Like the opposite.
Okay,
of
so-
buyers that you just
Yeah.
had.
so what is your verbiage say, Amy, on the seller side in the contract?
I'd have to put some more thought into it on a specific instance, but it's going to be somewhere around the lines of if the property fails to appraise at a minimum of
I
blank,
see.
seller is not obligated to sell.
Oh, that's good. Good to know. Good tip.
That protects your seller at the lower price. Have a gap.
Yeah.
It's just hard because I think the appraisers, some of them don't really know certain areas and you're tied to what their opinion is.
Yes, absolutely. Which is why the whole appraisal system is a very flawed system.
Thank you for saying that. Makes me feel better.
It's a
My
very
house
flawed
appraised
system.
very low. I was really pissed.
The appraiser, when I had my house refinanced a couple years ago, took off $82,000 for the view.
Wow.
82,000 for the view.
And I would have fought it, except it wasn't necessary at the time, but
Oh, so you can fight those. So
Yeah, you
because I
can.
just refinanced and this guy appraised my house at like 40,000 less than I know it could have went for.
so
And it screwed me up because I didn't take any. I was thinking about taking it. He liked just taking, but I just left the money alone because I'm like, you praise my house way lower
yeah,
than it is.
keep in mind too, that on a refinance appraisal, the appraiser is always going to be more conservative than a purchase appraisal
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they have nothing they're aiming for. Right? They're just like, hey, give us the approximate value of this property. And so they go out there and they're like, I don't know what I'm aiming for, so let's just do the best. Right? Whereas with a purchase contract, they're like, hey, we're in contract at 600,000. So the appraiser is like, hey, can I get the value of 600,000 out of this
Well-
property? And they look harder and they try harder to get to that number.
How could I rectify that scenario? How is there anything that I could have got a higher? I really had to get another appraisal.
You could have disputed it and then supplied comps and gone through a whole process, but it's, yeah. But so refinance appraisals will always come back more conservative, especially in this market where you've got multiple offers for purchases and people doing crazy things to get in their properties. Your refinance appraisal is going to be different
But
than
that
that
sucks for
purchase
the
appraisal.
people who have own property have money and they just like, okay, I want to take money out, but I don't want to beat my loan up by taking too much money out
Yeah.
when it doesn't make sense. That was my scenario. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to take it out if it don't make sense, but I need money.
Yeah.
Well, maybe
So
I have a
that's,
question.
yeah,
Do you think that the agent will go back and try to fight the appraisal?
they could. I've done that a couple of times. It's hard to win appraisal disputes with appraisers because they think they're God for the most part. Right, the whole transaction hinges on this appraisal coming in at this exact dollar. It really should be a range. It really should be, hey, if you're in like 5%, we're good. Because how can we say that the market
Exactly.
dictated the sales price to be this, and now this guy's gonna come in and tell me that's not the market value of the property? Like, it absolutely is, right? So that's where I go back to the appraisal system's flawed. So the other agent could absolutely, if they have a low appraisal, especially as the listing agent, you could go in there and ask for a copy of it, and you could file a dispute. Even on a conventional appraisal, you can file a dispute.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as the buyer's agent, you could as well. Keep that in mind. Like if you're running the risk of potentially losing this transaction, like you could ask for an extension of the appraisal contingency and file a dispute. And
But
if
then
we
that,
had-
sorry,
we
go
did
ahead.
have one on this one, because remember they countered us back with the appraisal contingency, but we'd gone in with this offer with no appraisal contingency because we had negotiated the gap. ahead of time, which means you don't need an appraisal contingency. And then they came back and said, well, if it comes in too low, then the seller's not obligated to sell, and then gave us our appraisal contingency back, which was silly. But even if you didn't have an appraisal contingency, you could still go in there and dispute it.
But then my buyers would end up having to pay more for the property.
They would, well, yeah. So this one came in low enough that the chances of us getting it to the contract price is probably it's going to be hard. Although there was that other comp that was like the same price or higher. Anyways,
I'm just trying to figure out, like, are you benefiting the buyer by asking for going in and fighting for that higher appraisal, or are you not benefiting? Like, you're obviously benefiting the seller because you're going to get more money for them, but
if you're going to lose the transaction for the buyer, then it would be warranted to fight that appraisal. So if the sellers are like, well, we're not willing to go that low, we're going to put it back on the market and hope we get something better, then at that point you could dispute the appraisal. If there's already a gap in place and your buyers are say, we're willing to pay 10,000 and the seller's willing to sell it at 575, then there's really no difference at that point in disputing it. If let's say that there was a $10,000 gap and we were in contract at 600 and the appraisal came in at 590 and you really thought it should have appraised at 600, you could dispute it to get it to 600, because then maybe your buyers would have less cash to come in with. So it just depends. In this case, I don't think we're going to get the appraiser to come up high enough to justify disputing it. I think the buyers are going to have to come out of pocket 10,000 regardless of what we would dispute it to. So it's probably better that we get the sellers to come to an agreement based on the appraised value and 10,000 versus trying to dispute it and move it higher.
it's crazy because every single transaction any one of us have will always be different. It's never the same.
It's never the same. And you've got to weigh it, right? Because every
PC forever, Sam.
That's legit. I'm not leaving ever.
Every transaction's different. You got to weigh it at each, right? Like I just gave you, like, hey, if the appraisal comes in low, would you dispute it or not? Like I just gave you 4 scenarios that would differ on whether you would want to dispute it or not, right?
You made an excellent point.
Yeah.
One of those was like, why dispute if you're not gonna, your cash isn't gonna come high enough to even make a difference.
To make a difference,
You
might as
still
well
gotta come up with
get
more
them to
money.
agree with it, right? So yeah, so it just all depends on the situation.
Wow.
Okay. Any other questions with regards to
Jeez.
sellers backing out or appraisals?
I have a
That was
question, Amy.
fantastic.
Yeah.
No, I think that we should say we're gonna talk about something and not talk about it and ask, do we have any questions? Because every time we don't have nothing, we never have questions. And we're sitting there going, what are we gonna do?
And no, and then when we have something, we talk about 3 other things. It's good.
It's
We're
good.
productive.
It's
We're
We're
productive.
productive. We touch on
All right.
everything. in here.
Martha, what was your question?
I don't think I have a question. I was just thinking how everybody's laughing about how every, each transaction is so uniquely different. And then you throw in the fact that whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market, really,
And how good the agent is on the other side.
Oh, God.
yeah.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many, it varies so much. And that's part of the reason why I love real estate, right? Like nothing's ever the same.
It's never the same.
And even when you
It
think
is
you've
the same.
mastered it, then you'll get a transaction that totally tells you like, sorry, nice try. You're not even close, right? Like
Yeah.
there's always something
That's
new.
good to know that we're all on the learning curve, because sometimes I'm just like,
I ain't gonna lie.
woo.
Hearing you guys talk about it, I'm like, gosh, that's a lot to keep in mind. You have to really be a thinker. You got to be Aquarius. You have to be a thinker to get through some of these contracts. I'm for real. But you got to constantly.
Hey.
Yeah.
Now you're giving yourself too much credit. What about all the other zodiac signs?
I know,
We're thinkers.
I'm
You're
kidding.
doomed, Mila,
No,
doomed.
You're right.
I'm just,
I just wanted to confirm.
intimidate me though. With all, we gotta do that. And when she started explaining it, I'm like, ooh, you have to really be conscious of what you're saying and how you're saying it.
Yeah.
You screw up your-
Mila, what were you gonna say, Mila?
I just wanted to confirm that, Amy, you said on all of your contracts that you when you're representing the seller, the contract that you accept, you always counter with the verbiage of, I thought I missed that part. Did you say you always send a counter with the verbiage of what were you saying?
About the appraisal,
Yeah, so
Marla?
oftentimes
Yes.
the buyers have made an offer with an appraisal gap. Then I will counter with that under a certain amount, the sellers are not obligated to sell.
Okay, only if they came in with that verbiage in their initial contract, the buyers.
Yeah, if there's
Okay.
no appraisal contingency, or if it's just a regular, like, we don't even see regular contracts hardly anymore with like your typical appraisal contingency, depending on the appraisal, then I don't worry about it. But if we've got a gap already negotiated in there, I protect my seller by putting a baseline on what we're willing to walk away with.
So for example, so like I submitted an offer and yesterday, and we did, the purchase price is for, let's say it's 500,000, and
Okay.
my sellers put in an offer at 545, but with that appraisal gap saying like, we will go 10,000 over appraisal not to exceed 545.
Uh-huh.
So in that case, if you went with our offer, are you saying that you would, as the listing agent, you would say, if the appraisal doesn't come in, or if it comes below, or what were you saying? If it comes in at a certain,
Yeah, I would
this
probably,
amount?
I'd probably come back as the listing agent and counter it, that if the appraisal comes in below 535,000, the seller is not obligated to sell. And that doesn't mean we wouldn't. It just means that we're not obligated to take 480 in an appraised value, right?
So you're saying, so like if you were to accept our offer, which says, well, not, I guess, never mind, because our offer is at 545, but, and they would
Yes.
still get, okay.
How much is the listing? Can I ask how much the listing, how much is the asking?
It's like 500,000.
Yeah, so if you guys came in at 545 with a $10,000 appraisal gap, I would probably counter at that the number that my seller wouldn't be obligated to sell at would be at 535. So we're locked in at 545 regardless. You are going to come in with 10,000 if the appraisal comes in low to get us to 545, or if it comes in below that, my sellers can put the property back on the market, or they could agree to go ahead and move forward with your sale, right? Like, depending on what that appraised value is, but because there's so many unknowns with that, I don't want to leave it open for the appraisal to come in at 490,000 and we were in contract at 545 and now we're stuck at like 500. Like, that's a big gap, right?
Yeah.
So they're already offered over asking.
Well over asking.
Well over asking. They're just trying to. So they don't.
So if the appraisal came in, so like, let's say we're under a contract, but you countered with, we won't take less than, if the appraisal comes in, we're not going to take anything less than 525.
Yeah.
Right. So then that was the contingency, and my buyers agree to that. So basically, if it came in at 525, well, we would be willing to pay up to 535, I guess,
Yeah.
right? So we would still have a deal, but.
Yep.
So like if it came in lower than that, and with our 10,000 only came up to, oh, never mind. Technically, we still have if it appraised that even, okay. I think I'm good. I'm answering my own question here.
She talked her way through it. Not bad. You're like me, Marcia.
Sometimes that's what it takes.
So, yeah.
Marcia.
That's what I have to do.
Hi, Amy. It's Jenny. Sorry.
Oh
Oh my gosh. I have a question. So, I'm almost at the end of escrow, and my buyers, they allowed a 2-week rent back
Okay.
for the sellers. But I mean, the agent, she hasn't been the best agent, and she's taken her time with everything. And my buyers are pretty upset about the timelines and everything. So she told me that the seller's home is vacant. So the one they're moving into is going to be vacant. And she's asking to stay another week extra. So they just need 1 week. But in my mind, I'm thinking like, why do you need a week to move out if that house is vacant? So is there some way that I could word it to her, how help me understand why they need a week. Like, I
So,
don't get it.
you already have it agreed to though, that there's a 2-week rent back, right?
Right, yeah,
So she's ultimately shortening it for your buyers.
yeah, exactly,
Right.
yeah.
So, I mean, I would agree to it and run away, but the reason, but the reason they probably want that is because even though the house is vacant, they can't move into it prior to the close of escrow. And they probably have to sell this house in order to close on that one. So they're thinking they're going to close either the same day or like within a day of each other.
Right.
And then they're gonna pack up all their stuff and move it. And they're probably gonna take the time to actually clean the house rather than like being out the door at 4:49 when the house is supposed to, get keys at 5 o'clock.
Right, yeah.
So that's probably why they're asking for a week, is to make sure that they do have time to get everything moved and transitioned and get the house cleaned and turned around for the buyers.
Okay, awesome. So I'll talk to my buyers, just because the agent, she's been pretty bad, like
Yeah.
the appraisal too, like she wasn't there for the appraisal. And it came in low, and I mean, we had the appraisal gap, but I mean, the purchase price is less, but at the same time, my buyers have to pay that. It was like,
Yeah.
it's 4,000. So yeah, just a lot of stuff. So my buyers are pretty frustrated, but I'm gonna word it to them, to like, for them to understand too. You don't want to move into a messy house.
Yeah,
that's for
and you
sure.
can let them
Well,
know
that's how they're
too,
gonna
that
feel.
they're already in agreement that they can stay 2 weeks after the close of escrow. Like, here's the bottom line, like what we've already agreed to is 2 weeks. And they're shortening it up to 1 week, and we're doing that in writing, so they actually have to be out in 1 week instead of 2, like that.
So
that's the-
I can send that as an AEA, like in writing, for them to agree with that
Yep.
when we, okay, cool.
Yeah, and you would do it as an AEA to the SIP, to the seller in possession form,
Got it. Okay.
to the addending to the existing agreement.
Existing agreement.
AEA.
Hey, it'll help you. It'll help you if you change it to existing agreement.
Okay,
I know.
So should I take a Red Bull to get on tonight? Because do we even have time for the mail merge?
oh, you're
If
right.
not, I'm gonna make sure I try to stay up.
You know what we doing tonight, then, huh?
Get your Red Bull, Mila.
You know what?
I'm just asking, I mean, because I really want to learn that, but I'll go grab a Red Bull maybe around 4 o'clock just to ensure that I know it's so embarrassing, but I wake up really early, so I'm always.
Don't be embarrassed, Mila. Everybody has their time that they should be in bed. I mean, I'm probably
Yeah.
asleep on the couch by about 8:30 when I don't have PC. So, but we won't talk about that. So yeah, I mean, I could try to like shove it in the next 16 minutes, but then it's probably not gonna get all your guys' questions answered and show you guys how to do it all. So let Mila, if you're open for that, we could do it this evening. Otherwise, I could bump it to tomorrow.
No, I'm open. I'm
Okay.
open because I'm in between the wash house, so I'll just
We-
grab me a
Yeah.
Red Bull and
All right.
Grandma will be woke tonight.